Tropical rainforests are the most diverse ecosystems in the world. This is the most northerly example of such forest on the American continent. It's the Tropical Forest Reserve of Los Tuxtlas in the state of Veracruz in Mexico. This reserve, just 1.5 kilometers wide and 5 kilometers long, contains more species of plants than in the entire British Isles. This hot and humid atmosphere is teeming with insects. Indeed, the tropics have 80% of the world's insect fauna. And it's very likely that in forests such as this there are many more yet to be discovered. The sound of insects fills your ears, particularly at night. And the ground flora is extremely sparse. This is because it's an evergreen forest. Because this is an evergreen forest, very little light penetrates these many layers of leaves, except where there's a gap created by a branch fall or a tree fall. But at eye level, the vegetation appears to be very thick because of the trunks of small trees and saplings. Standing here must be a little like standing at the bottom of a deep lake, because up there, 30 meters above, is where all the light is, and that's where all the primary production is taking place. Apart from the tree canopies themselves, there are also the vines, which clamber their way up from below to spread their leaves in the sunlight. Their roots hanging in festoons from the canopy, and there are the epiphytes, plants living on the branches of other plants, where light is more available. Stranglers begin life as epiphytic seedlings in the canopy of other trees. As they grow, they send down roots which anchor in the soil and thicken into stems which coalesce to form a sturdy trunk. By this stage, the host tree has been shaded rather than strangled out of existence by the canopy of the fig and probably also by competition from its roots. Though some can be heard, animals are not much in evidence in the daytime, but at night the situation is quite different. The calls of frogs join the chorus, and many mammals become active too. The rotting trunk of a fallen tree supports a sleepy iguana, the largest species of lizard in the neotropics. All this life gives a misleading impression that tropical rainforests are highly productive. But they're not. This forest, although it stands on a volcanic soil, is like other tropical rainforests. Most of its nutrients are locked up in the living components of the ecosystem, particularly the leaves. The distribution of nutrients in soils here is patchy, and in most places the soils are very poor. The large biomass which is found in this forest, and in others like it, is sustained by very rapid and efficient cycling of nutrients within the ecosystem. In this programme, we will look at the structure of this fascinating and complex system, at some of the animals and plants which are a part of it, and at the scientific research being carried out by ecologists from the University of Mexico in this reserve. Jose Sarucan uses the abundant astracarium palm to age natural gaps in the forest created by tree falls, and Luis Pinzon investigates the decomposition of dead wood. Richard Vogt uses suspended traps to sample the reptile population in the trees. And Rodrigo Medellin sets out black mist nets to trap night-flying bats. Carlos Vasquez Yanes studies seed germination in forest gaps. Whilst high up in the canopy, Alex Estrada observes distant howler monkeys. Plants and their herbivores are the particular study of Rodolfo Diazo.
Perhaps the most realistic way of looking at the tropical rainforest is as a mosaic of vegetation in different stages of development after disturbances, natural disturbances caused by tree falls or branch falls. Here I am now in a gap of about 6 months caused by the fall of a branch of an Ectandra ambigens tree. This fall is causing a dramatic change in the conditions of the forest, in particular, the light conditions of the forest. And this creates also the conditions appropriate for the establishment of a number of species that have their seeds dormant in the soil, waiting for a gap to happen. These two plants are a very good example of these pioneer trees. This is Carica papaya, an early successional plant that will reach maturity within about 3 years and then disappear. This one here is Heliocarpus appendiculatus. This will grow with the gap and will remain with it until about 40, perhaps 50 years. The growth of these plants really initiates the building phase of the natural regeneration. Let's go and see if we can find this building phase somewhere else in the forest. This gap is 4 years old now, and as you can see, the conditions here have changed very much. For one thing, the vegetation is much more diverse. The other thing is that the vegetation is also very dense. Of the plants I showed before, Carica papaya has completed its life cycle and disappeared already, whilst this one here, Heliocarpus appendiculatus, is growing very fast and it has already reached a height of about 11 meters. Trees like these, like Heliocarpus, are already filling up the gap, and they will soon fill the gap completely and will shade the situation again and create the conditions for the next stage of development of the forest cycle. Some 30 or 40 years after a gap has been produced, the forest goes into what is called the mature stage. And this is a very good example of this. The pioneer species, together with the canopy trees, have filled up the gap and created the conditions appropriate for the establishment of the shade-tolerant plants, particularly the palms and some other like the rubiaceae. Also, the seedlings of the canopy trees are waiting here for small gaps to occur and shoot up. There's about 200 seedlings per square meter of this Nectandra species. But also, the forest soil already has the seed bank of the pioneer species waiting for another gap to occur, which probably will happen within the next 100 years.
Research has shown that the seeds of pioneer plants remain dormant in shade, but germinate rapidly in gaps.
We have done experiments to prove that. We have taken seeds from two common pioneer trees from the gaps, Cecropia obtusifolia and Piper auretum. Those seeds were placed into petri dishes like this, on a wet surface, and then the dishes were located along a gradient between the center of the gap and the nearby forest, or the edge of the gap. After a few days, the seeds that were located in the center of the gap germinated quite easily, but those located near the border of the gap or inside the forest didn't germinate.
This response to light and shade depends on the phytochrome pigment in the seeds. In gaps, sunlight contains a high ratio of red to far red wavelengths, and phytochrome is activated. In shade, the green canopy absorbs red light selectively. The low ratio of red to far red blocks phytochrome action and prevents germination.
This system allows the seed to remain dormant when they fall in mature forest, or to germinate when they fall in a gap.
Palm stems do not grow in width as the plant grows taller. In Astracarium mexicanum, a terminal bud produces only a few new leaves every year. This results in the incremental growth of the stem.
When one can relate somehow these height increments with time, it is possible then to calculate the age of an individual. In this case, for Astracarium, we can use the scars that are left by each falling leaf to have an idea of the growth rate and then of the age of each individual. By having tagged about 1,200 individuals in the forest of different sizes, we have been able to calculate fairly accurately what each scar means in terms of time, and then we have been able to age each individual. For example, this one here must have something about 50 years of age. Palms have one drawback in the sense that if they are strongly hit by a falling branch or a large tree in the terminal bud, they will be killed because that bud is killed and there is no other way in which the palm can grow. But other palms can survive to these events by just being bent, like in the case of this one here, and after having been bent, they start growing upwards again, producing a kink in the trunk. In this case, the point after which the plant has been bent and it starts growing erect gives us a very accurate idea of how long ago a disturbance event has happened in one specific spot of the forest. And by calculating these times and knowing how many of these palms are distributed in the forest, by this means we can produce a mosaic of different edges of the forest and produce a computer illustration of this situation and relate the different edges of the forest with the floristic composition at each stage, and this will give us a very interesting insight into the structure and dynamics of a forest like this one.
Epiphytes, perched up in the branches of trees, must obtain all their nutrients from the rain, which leaches minerals from the canopy above. Though drenched by rain during rainstorms, this water drains so rapidly from branches that, paradoxically, epiphytes in the rainforest live in a physiologically dry environment. So maybe we shouldn't be surprised to find this epiphytic cactus. It has a crassulacean acid metabolism typical of cacti, which enables them to conserve water. This bromeliad traps several litres of water in its rosette of leaves, a microhabitat for animals such as frogs and mosquito larvae. For other plants, too much water is the problem. Many leaves of rainforest plants have characteristic drawn-out drip tips. These help drain water rapidly off the leaf surface, which probably helps reduce the number of epiphyll algae and lichens, which colonize leaf surfaces and block out light. But it's not only plants that use other plants as support.
One of the many interesting features of tropical systems is the great abundance of mutualistic interactions between plants and ants. And a very spectacular example of this is the interaction between Cecropia plants and their associated ants, Astica. Here we have two young Cecropia trees which might be already occupied by the Astica ants. Let's see if we can find them and see them in action. Now, what are the advantages for the ants? As you can see, the Cecropia tree is hollow, and this provides housing for the ants. Also, the plant has these structures located at the base of the petioles called trichilia, and these secrete nutritious substances that the ants feed on. Now, what are the advantages for the plant? Well, the ants continuously patrol the plant and protect it against the attack of any herbivore or any vine coming on top of the plant. As you can see, the plant is relatively free of damage and it has no vines on it. Now, this interaction is not exclusive for light-demanding plants, but obviously for a plant like this growing in a gap, it is highly advantageous to have this sort of mutualistic interaction.
Perhaps the most abundant insect species in rainforests are ants. The biomass they consume is enormous. Starting at the base of an astracarium palm, they have defoliated all nearby plants. A nest like this contains at least 1 million workers and thousands of soldiers and other specialist castes. Attocephalotes leafcutter ants can defoliate a large tree in a single night, but more often they forage widely, taking pieces of leaf from different trees. The leaf pieces are not eaten, but are carried back to the nest, which is 5 meters deep and 8 meters across. Here, in warm and humid conditions, the leaves are rotted down by fungi, which the ants consume as food. Perpetual warmth in a rainforest means that they remain active by day and by night, foraging everywhere from the ground to the canopy, and only retreating in heavy rain. If ants are the major defoliators, then termites are important in reducing the amount of dead wood, an essential first step to rapid recycling of minerals back to the plants. In turn, they provide rich pickings for animals. This baby anteater, just 1 year old, is foraging for termites. It has powerful hooked claws to tear off dead wood and a long sticky tongue to scoop up termites, ants and small grubs. This tree fell only a few months ago and is already heavily rotted. its remains will vanish within a year from now. Decomposition of fallen logs and trees occurs in all kinds of forest, but in a tropical rainforest, the rate of decomposition can be at least 3 times faster than in a temperate forest. The wood, under these high humidity and temperature conditions, is rapidly attacked by fungi, bacteria and insects. There is little climatic seasonal variation here, so that decomposition continues most of the time. The sheer structural diversity of a rainforest creates microhabitats for an enormous variety of insects. Night-flying insects can easily be sampled by attracting them to a white surface, illuminated by ultraviolet light, a kind of light trap. Not surprisingly, most of them are beetles. Cicadas are very common. The singing males produce the characteristic noise of a tropical night. Insects play a major role in this ecosystem. They are important pollinators and decomposers. They act as carriers of fungal, bacterial and virus diseases. They eat huge quantities of leaves, seeds and seedlings, and so affect the regeneration process.
Insects are by far the most diverse group of animals in this forest. In gaps in particular, we can see a very devastating activity of insects. This plant, for example, Heliocarpus appendiculatus, growing in this gap, shows very clearly the impact of herbivory by insects. Interestingly enough, Cecropia obtusifolia, protected by ants, does not show all that much herbivory. But anyway, insects in general are the main herbivores in this forest, and in gaps like this, we can see plenty of examples of their activities. In this part of the forest, just a few meters away from where we were, there are almost no pioneer plant species, but also notice that there is very little damage by herbivores. Now, taking a large sample of trees, including both pioneer plant species and late succession species, the levels of damage that occur in this forest are around 7% of the leaf area eaten by herbivores. Now, what is the impact of herbivory on the population biology of a given plant? And also, what is the role of herbivory on the dynamics of the forest is one of the many mysteries of the tropical rainforest that remain to be investigated.
Some of the most characteristic trees of the neotropics are the strangler figs of the genus Ficus. When in fruit, they attract insects, bats and birds. Monkeys feast in the canopy, and below, other animals forage for fallen figs. The convoluted trunk provides a microhabitat for plants, frogs, snakes and lizards amongst many others. Different species of plants and animals are found at different vertical levels in the forest.
These traps are designed to capture reptiles and amphibians at different levels of the forest. This line is set at the top of the canopy here, around 15 meters. We've caught one lizard, Cortiophanes. It's a member of the family Iguanidae, an insectivore which lives primarily in the trees above 5 meters, so it will venture to the forest floor. Notice the casque on the back of its head, which makes it a member of the casque-headed lizards. Its dark green and black coloration affords it camouflage from its major predators, birds. This set of traps is the next level of the forest, at about 3 meters. Here we have a nocturnal lizard, Lepidophyma, member of the Xanthusid lizard family, another insectivore. So the third layer of traps at the 1 meter level. Here we have a small lizard, Anolis humilis, member of the same family as the larger lizard we caught. As we tend to get lower in the canopy, lizards become more abundant, but also their size is smaller.
We are 25 meters above the ground level in a tree crown of one of the trees used by howler monkeys. These are one of the largest arboreal mammals in the tropical rainforests in the American continent. They use the tree crowns to find their food and shelter, and they live permanently at this level of the forest. They find their food in trees such as fig, one of the most popular tree species in their leaf and fruit diet. Monkeys in this forest participate in important ways in the cycling of nutrients and energy by consuming the leaves and fruits of about 30 species of trees. In addition to that, by consuming the ripe fruits of many of these tree species, they also disperse their seeds and thus contribute to the natural process of rainforest regeneration. The white-tailed deer and the peccaries are two of the largest ground-dwelling mammalian herbivores in tropical rainforests. They feed on the seeds and seedlings of many plant species. We must ask ourselves to what extent their almost disappearance from tropical forests has affected the original distribution of seed and seedling populations.
Bats pollinate night-opening flowers, some of which can only be pollinated by nocturnal animals. Fruit-eating bats act as very important seed dispersal agents. There are many different species of insect-eating bats, and there are also some carnivorous bats which take vertebrate prey. There is also the vampire bat, which is well known for its peculiar habit of feeding exclusively on blood. Rodrigo Medellin is the bat expert at Los Tuxtlas.
Just before dusk, we set up these black mist nets across paths and clearings, which are bat flyways. In Mexican rainforest, I have collected up to 27 species of bats, among which the most common and easiest to trap are the vampire bats. The vampire bat, for feeding, cuts off a bit of skin out of the bigger mammals and starts licking the blood that's pouring out with the help of its tongue and its V-grooved lower lip. This is a fruit-eating bat. It feeds mainly on the fruit of piper. It cuts off the fruit and carries it to a night roost. This is as well a fruit-eating bat of the genus Artiveus. It feeds on figs and other small fruits and acts as a dispersal agent. This bright-colored bat, sort of reddish, feeds on insects, but in the bad times of the year switches onto fruit, so that makes for him easier to survive. It sometimes goes gleaning through the vegetation, grasping grasshoppers from the branches and leaves. It's rather rare among the bats of the tropical rainforest.
In this film, we have seen some of the diversity of animals and plants, and their mutual interdependence. We have seen that the rainforest regenerates continually as trees fall, creating gaps, and that a bank of dormant seeds lies everywhere, awaiting light to trigger them into rapid growth. The climate here is perfect for life. Hundreds of thousands of plants and animals coexist, an ecosystem which is the richest expression of life on Earth.